The AP exam. Don't read too much into it. You know, there are actually two of the points are one directly, one indirectly related to thesis. That's why it's graded so much. Don't read too much into it, because basically what it's saying is you get good evidence and support your argument. You write a good essay, you'll do fine. I'll let you know what the rubric is, but I don't read too much into rubrics. Whenever you get a rubric in a class for an essay, you know, they will score it based on the fact of whether or not you wrote a good essay. If you wrote a good essay, the rubric will affect it. If you wrote a bad essay, it won't. Don't worry too much about it. Just write a good essay. Now, that happy note, should we have an essay tomorrow? I'll be here at 4 a.m., ready to roll. I don't quit. It'll be next week. It'll be next week. I don't know the exact date. Let's go for the 4th. And 40th. And just so please look at this over the next few days. Go and put it away. What's our quiz going to be on Monday? And the Bill of Rights on page 108, 109. And it's just going to be a really basic little explanation of it. And we'll talk about some of the Bill of Rights because we got it related to the history. And they are, trust me, they are not absolute at all. There were 12 amendments proposed for the Bill of Rights, 10 were ratified. And I'm not going to do a quiz on 260 to 272, but I got to add a little bit more reading. But let's make it due on Wednesday. So you have to finish the rest of chapter, what chapter? 6? Is that right? Yeah. We're in chapter 6. It's chapter 6. It's a big chapter. I mean, think about it. It covers from the Articles of Confederation all the way through the Constitution, and then like the creation of the country, what's called the Federalist era. Ends with the election of 1800. I mean, it seems more intuitive to be 2 chapters, but for whatever reason, our book is 1 chapter. It's the way life is. And then we'll have another chapter like, why is this only 1? Okay, so happy? I know you're a little sad because it's almost the weekend, but remember one thing. What's the great thing about weekends?
Really close to Monday.
Boom. And what I tell you, the best part is you get older. It goes in faster. It just flies. You've got my age, you blink your eye, and it's already the next year. Yeah.
So when is the?
Let's make it do on Wednesday. Oh, and when's your PSAT?
Next Wednesday.
It's due on Tuesday. Sorry. Such is life.
Why not Thursday?
Yeah, Thursday. I like Thursday.
Yeah, so do I. It's due on Tuesday. Sorry, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, you got the PSAT. So there'll be a few of us here doing the PSAT. So that's, I don't know what I'm going to do. Last year I think we just had class. How many are taking the PSAT? Yeah, enough for class. All right, we're good. The cool people are here, right? Yeah.
No.
Huh? No. What? Does that make you feel better? Okay, good. Okay, I'm fine. All right, let's go take your notes out. Yeah. Here's another one little man. All right, so let's go ahead and take out your notes. We got right to the last judicial, right? So let's go and finish up that. And just review, what's the most important power of the president? Execute and interpret, yeah? And what is the clause in the Constitution that gives the Congress the ability to pass laws virtually on anything potentially? Yeah. Necessary and proper. Sometimes it's called the elastic clause. Sometimes it's called implied power. And this will be a debate almost immediately. And Madison, literally would be like, why did I do that? That's coming. But he did it not because he didn't like the clause. He didn't like the guy suggesting the laws. Nobody liked Hamilton. Now, I'm going to leave this up. I know, but I don't want to go through the turning it off, turning it on, reconnecting. So, let me write the last 2 things here. Can you see it? Get the things in the background? Kind of. How about I go over here? That's a J. So we have these arrows. Does that sound good? Is that better? Judicia. That's the Latin term for it. I'm kind of. Okay. So, who creates the court system? Yeah, they legislate, and who confirms judges? Yeah, legislate. So they basically create it. So they can get rid of the entire court system we have now and put in a new one. There just has to be a Supreme Court. And Congress did not say what they did. So here's the biggie, which is also here. What was the check on the judicial to the legislative? Can we write that down?
We just wrote it down.
Okay, judicial review. So let's write that down. Judicial review that you already did. Judicial review. They gave themselves this power. It's not in the Constitution. Arguably, it's not constitutional. The Supreme Court gave themselves that power in 1803. What's that? Oh, you're right. You're right. And so just get the notes out. We'll see. The Supreme Court gave themselves that power. And if the court case is Marbury versus Madison, we'll get to it. It's the most important Supreme Court case. Because they basically said, we can decide what laws, this is what we got to get. We can decide if a law is unconstitutional. We can decide if a law is unconstitutional. And it was unclear if this was only state laws or federal laws. And this would not be accepted immediately. The Supreme Court did not say, we can decide the constitutionality of laws, and everybody said, oh, that's a really good idea. No! This would still be controversial through the rest of the century. And this is something that people forget today. And we'll talk about this, especially when we get to Andrew Jackson. People forget this. Today, we accept this for whatever reason. Back then, they did not. And so well, remember the veto? That's what Madison thought would decide constitutionality. That'd be the president's role. Now, that's technically not. Then Jefferson and Madison said, the states should decide constitutionality. And that nearly led to the Civil War in 1833. Andrew Jackson would terrify him so much that he saved the country. He's a complex character. And there'd be a Civil War on that issue. So it's really important to understand that they gave themselves that power, and by about 1896 or so, it was basically accepted the Supreme Court can do this. After the Civil War, it's like, we can do it. Then by the end of the century, it was, accepted. So that gives the Supreme Court immense power. But the last thing you have to get is this. Just jot this down somewhere. Only if there's a court case. Only if there's a court case. It's got to wind its way through the federal courts and the appeals court, and then get to the Supreme Court. They do not rule on a law unless there's a court case. And that's why when people say the Supreme Court interprets laws, that's incorrect. Because they don't interpret most laws, because most laws never get to the Supreme Court. There are laws on the books in the United States today, federal and various states, that are blatantly unconstitutional. But they never get to the Supreme Court. So has everyone got that? So the Supreme Court does not look at many laws. And this gives the Supreme Court the power to change law. Just throw it out, reinterpret it. And this is what we call activist judges. And the Supreme Court now is the most activist in changing laws in the history of the United States. By far. There's never been a court this involved in changing. This next Supreme Court session that's beginning right now could be the most radical in American history. I mean, radically change people's lives. Huh? It's called the Roberts Court right now, the Supreme Court. There's a very good chance anything from abortion rights could be gone. A radical change on what's right to care about weapons, about gun ownership, basically free carry anywhere. And there's a Supreme Court, there's a law that might get rid of all environmental regulations. Now you can say these are good things or bad things. That is your point of view. But the point is, wow, the Supreme Court is changing things. And like for example, Thomas Jefferson despised the Supreme Court. He wanted to get rid of it. He just wanted it gone. But it's a big deal. And they don't have that power according to the Constitution. The problem is, how do you get rid of it? Now they have it. What if you say that power of the Supreme Court is unconstitutional? Who do you go to? The Supreme Court? I mean, they can do it. They just have to say, we're not going to follow it. But then who knows what would happen? What a time. Like I said, you guys are living in amazing times. It actually, yeah, we're on the cusp of something. And on that app, you know, they have judicial review of the presidency too. So for example, when Richard Nixon recorded all Oval Office conversations, in the process of one of these conversations, he admitted to a massive crime. He tried to keep these tapes secret. The Supreme Court said he must release it, and that's why he resigned in what's called Watergate. He tried to use the power of the presidency to overturn it, well, basically to subvert the democratic process in an election. He got caught. Try to cover it up. That's what we call today Watergate. We'll get to it. And the court said, you must turn that over. And this can still happen today. This will come up about a former president too. This is going to come up about President Trump. Because he's not going to have his advisors talk about what they knew about the January 6th insurrection. He said a day and a half ago. Can't talk about it. It's executive privilege. Because they're clearly involved. And they don't want them to talk. This is going to be a big deal. And then what do we have here? The executive appoints. They appoint judges. And how long is a term for a judge? It's a lifetime appointment. Everyone got that? Judges are lifetime. The whole idea is a lifetime appointment means they'll be impartial. So they won't have to try to worry about their next ruling might affect their election down the road. So for example, the Supreme Court in the state of Montana, that's an elected position. Most states, they're elected. But for the US government, they're appointed by the president. And a lifetime appointment, it does make sense about impartial judges. But then again, they are not accountable to the people. So they can make a ruling and never have to worry about it. Judges can be impeached like a president's impeached, but you can imagine that almost never happens. In fact, there was only one judge removed from office, and that was during the Jefferson administration because he had gone basically insane. So they removed him. So with that, that's the government, separation of powers. There are checks and balances, but for example, remember I told you about declaring war? That is meaningless if Congress just lets the president do what they want. So it can break down. And we got the checks, balances. Obviously, I could go into more detail. We can talk about this more. I want to give you the basic elements of it, but don't forget, they were worried about a tyrant like a king, so they wanted the separation of powers. So let's go ahead then and get what kind of government they created. If you notice, I never mentioned states. So what they have is called federalism. And this is an old picture of federalism in the 1880s. Oh, no, this is 1890s. But they have the various states and territory. Yeah, so this has to be 1880s because they have the Dakotas. Everyone just assumed that Dakota would be a state. But then they realized, hey, we can get 4 senators out of this deal. So federalism is this separation of powers because what we have is enumerated powers that's listed down for the national government. So we have the national government, but then every other power, all the other powers go to the state governments. And so that is what federalism means. Federalism means there's a national government with power, and then in our context, state governments with power. Because most of your interactions with government are state. And within the state, there's federalism. We have state, county, city. I mean, your most interactions would probably be with, think about, the state police is called highway patrol, county or sheriff, city police. There's federalism. And the idea would be there'll be certain powers, federal, state, but the federal is supreme. Federal is supreme. So that's why Constitution, President, Senate, House, the federal states. And that's why we call this a federal union, and it's the federal government. Germany, for example, is a federalist country. They have Staaten with certain powers. Canada's federal. The provinces have a lot of power in Canada. Britain, not so much. England has power. Wales has power. Scotland has power. They're technically different countries, but that's it. But here's the biggie. What was that law that said federal government might actually have a lot of power? You okay? Pleasant feeling. Remember the necessary and proper clause. Maybe. Because of that, because of the necessary and proper clause, the federal government has a lot more power than originally stated. And that is going to be a fight between how much power the states have and how much power the federal government has. By the way, nobody is consistent to that. If one group is in power, let's say right now, the Democrats have the majority, control the House and the Senate and the presidency. Republicans will say the federal government has too much power. When Republicans have power in the federal government, Democrats will say, oh, there's too much power in the federal government, the states should have more power. Nobody's ever consistent. And they take for granted that people will forget. You think be hypocrites because everyone's going to forget. And you know what? They're right. Everybody forgets. Except me. So I hate them all. No. So with that, I put this picture up again because I just enjoy it so much. You can't change the Constitution. And remember, it was 13 votes for the articles. You can change it, but it's really hard to change it. 2/3 of the Congress must agree to amendment. 2/3, then signed by the president. I forgot to put that in, but signed by the president, and then 3/4 of the states, either state assemblies or state conventions. So it's almost impossible to amend. Almost. It can be happen. But the last amendment, even though when the last time the Constitution was changed, 1993, and it was an amendment they ratified in 93 that was first proposed in 1789 as part of the Bill of Rights. It wasn't ratified then, it was ratified in 1993. It's about the pay of legislators. It's kind of a meaningless amendment. And because of the way the House and or especially the way the Senate is, it's almost impossible to imagine. In fact, it's impossible to imagine an amendment happening. They couldn't get an amendment ratified through the Senate that said, we believe puppies are cute. As a country, we like puppies and kittens. Nope, won't happen. Would not happen. I mean, in the United States of America, the Constitution has a big hole. About 52% of the population are not considered equal citizens, according to the United States Constitution. Women, which is only more than half the population. And there was an attempt to change the Constitution to rectify that in the 70s, and it failed. And it wouldn't even get a vote in the Senate. So that's where we're at now. And that's what we call kind of a big hole. It's only more than half the population, so maybe they should be patient. Montana has that in their state constitution, that men and women are equal. That is in the state constitution. But it's kind of funny. I guarantee you Montana would not approve that amendment. Would not approve it. No chance. Yeah.
So is the number between like men and women, that's it, or is it between other things as well?
Say it again.
Like the 52%? What is that?
I'm just talking 62% of the population only.
Oh, that's
of the US, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, sorry, just to reiterate what you said, in the country's constitution, does it specifically say that women are equal, or does it imply that?
It implies. Specifically the 14th Amendment.
What is the 14th Amendment?
We'll get to it, but it's about citizenship. It's the most important part of the Constitution, because it says that the federal government laws apply to the states. It was one of the Reconstruction amendments. It's really important. And boy, will we get to it. So that. Oh, by the way, I think that makes it clear with this, doesn't it? Everyone good? Everyone happy? Such a good atlas. So what we have created is a republic. It's a government by representation. We are not a democracy. A democracy is government of representative. I'm sorry, democracy is where the people have power and vote on everything. That is a true democracy that comes from Greece. And so we would directly vote on every law. That is a democracy. And I think you can see the problem with that. Madison said that in Federalist number 10. Madison said that in Federalist number 10. That if you have a big country, how can people possibly vote for every single law? I mean, just imagine when you turn 18, you would have to vote on every single proposal that goes on in the United States. Like if you sit there and go, okay, should there be a stoplight in the corner of Maple and Elm Street in Peoria, Illinois? No, we don't want that, right? That's all we care about. You see a problem? Who here could find Peoria, Illinois on a map? A few, right? You would get, you could find Illinois maybe, and then go from there. I'll tell you where Peoria is. It's like the middle. Peoria. I've been to Peoria. Well, let me just tell you about my experience in Peoria. I got out. So moving on. So we vote, it's called a democratic republic, in that we vote for some of the representatives who then make those votes. And some are the city, county, state, national, and that's federalism. That's the democratic republic. It is a democracy in a broader sense, which what we call it, we'll get to that in a sec. But there's many barriers between government and the people. I mean, think about it for a second. The president to this day is not elected by the people. The Senate wasn't until 1913. The courts, the people don't have any control over the federal court system unless Congress increases the size of the court system or gets rid of judges. And they see you can't pass a law in the Senate, so they won't. And then terms, by having a term limit like for president or just terms itself, they constantly have to go up and say, well, I'm going to run again. Also, there's no right to vote. Nowhere in the Constitution did it say that people have any right to vote. It just said that voters pick members of the House, and that's it. States make those rules. Do you have a right to vote today? No. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say you have a right to vote. Nowhere. There's no constitutional right to vote in the United States of America. So when people say, I have a right to vote, then you must live in Canada. Because this doesn't exist here. Now, there are certain things in the Constitution that say you can't have your vote taken away. And they can't deprive people 18 and over from voting. But that is not the same as a right to vote. So you can go do the process of voting, but they don't have to count them. They throw away millions of votes every year. Every year. Huh? Just, they say they're irregular. Something's wrong with them. I'm not going to count them. We don't know how many. Because every state has different rules. So you do not have a right to vote. Most people probably have no idea. People say, I have the right to vote. Actually, no. We'll get to some of the amendments and you go, that doesn't say you have a right to vote. The 15th is most famous. The right to vote cannot be taken away from you if you are a former slave. But that doesn't say you have a right to vote. That just says I can't deprive you of the vote because you were a slave. Big deal, isn't it? I mean, it's a big deal. Did anyone know that? Did anyone suspect that? I knew it. That's what we call a whole. By the way, could there be a constitutional amendment that says everybody has a right to vote? Sure. Would that pass? No. Not at all. Not at all. The minority party would stuff it. It's passed the House. but won't pass the Senate. So, why? No radical change. If it's a pain to vote and your vote doesn't count, a lot of people don't vote. You have all these barriers, nothing radical can happen. Nothing radical. And, oh, by the way, that's the Roman Senate. I thought that was a good appropriate picture. I painted that myself back in 389. That was a pretty rough time. We had 3 emperors. Moving on. And they didn't lie when this happened. This is a strong government to protect the elite. They didn't disguise this. This was not like I'm making some kind of assumption. No, they said it. Madison said this in Federalist number 10. They did not hide this fact. But they also believed that the elite were smarter and had more to lose. And they like to say it's government of a better sort. Why would we have the riffraff, aka you people, in the elite, unriffraff, like me? Is that a word, unriffraff? Oh, you're the arbiter. Is that a word? It's a word, yeah. Riffraff, unriffraffed. You people, riffraff. They didn't lie about it. We want government of a better sort because you are swayed by emotion. You don't think. You're uneducated. You notice it said me? What makes me elite? Because I'm standing with a bowling shirt on. And so with that, but here's the thing. A lot of them would have said it was better. The only way this country's going to survive are the people with the most to lose that are being charged. And there might be an element of logic to it. I'm not saying it's true, but there might be some logic to it. There's also some big flaws to it. But you could have people who thought it was best for the country and best for themselves. You can have both those thoughts. Now, how long do you suppose it's going to be people who thought, it's best for me, let's make it really good for me, and start rigging it? How long do you suppose it took for that to happen? Yeah, almost immediately. Power really does corrupt. Out there. I'm a benevolent-ish dictator. Ish. And it protects property. It is protected in the Constitution, property. Contracts, too. It's a big deal. And therefore, it's protecting those with property, the elite. But the biggest property were slaves. It doesn't say slaves are protected, but it protects property. And everybody knew exactly what that meant. The human beings that are owned by slaveholders are protected. And our vision of democracy would start coming about in the 1820s and 1830s. It was personified by its greatest champion, Andrew Jackson. Jackson coined what our term is democracy. And in the 1820s and 1830s, they asked the question, who is sovereign? Remember, sovereign is who has the power. And to Jackson, it was not the elite, not the rich, not the big plantation owners, the people. That's what Jackson said. Now, I'm embellishing it just a touch. When Jackson said, we have power, not a few rich people who dominate our lives, what did he really mean? What kind of people?
White men.
White men. Now, all white men. So that's pretty radical. But also, wow, not radical. Missing a lot. He also was a horrific slave owner. And some of his battles against American Indians were bloody on the point of genocide. He's a complex character, and he saved the Union. Jackson is really complex. Every time you look at a $20 bill, you're supposed to say, wow, we live in a complex country. But good stories. But our vision of democracy, when we as citizens of the United States say democracy, that's what we think of, this beautiful mountain valley. And all the bounty that our country can lead us. Look at that. Okay, oh wow. When we think of democracy, say, we're a democracy. This is what we think of, isn't it? The people have power. So we are a democracy. But it wasn't because of the Constitution. It was because we as people believe it. So that's bold. So with that, Speaking of bowling, the preamble. The preamble of the Constitution is maybe its best part. The rest of the Constitution is really dry and boring. That's pretty amazing. This says, as a people. And it doesn't say men or women. The people. Doesn't say color or religion or belief or height. It says, we the people. And then, okay, justice, all these. This is a pretty complex one. The welfare for all people. That's in the U.S. Constitution. We can argue what that means. We as a country must look out for each other. It's a good document. The rest of it, just, well, I'm saying it's not important, but this is the only part that has little touches of the Declaration of Independence. And has a great way to begin the Constitution, right? We the people is a good way to do it. Yes, it was mostly elite. Now, the bell's about ready to ring, isn't it? Oh no, we got plenty of time. Don't we?
Yeah, like 10, it's like 9.
So, God, I thought this went really fast. So when I was a youth growing up, yes, I did have a shower. There was no photographic evidence of me as a young person.
I thought you were just spawned on Earth as a.
I was 18,
Oh,
because there's no photographic evidence of me as a child. I'm actually telling the truth. I just appeared. I preach camera. Oh, we have it. But do I remember on Saturday mornings, there was a big deal on the 3 major networks, and that's it. They had cartoons every Saturday morning. And in between cartoons, they'd have Schoolhouse Rock. And you probably heard it because you probably seen it in elementary school. I can't believe what a big deal this was. By the way, this was funded through a grant for the National Endowment of Humanity. So this is a government program. But it's a big deal. But this is how I memorized. Schoolhouse Rock is how I memorized this. The preamble to the Constitution. I know it by heart. And so I remember this cartoons would come on, and in between them, Schoolhouse Rock. And I got to be honest with you. 2 things. First off, they're great. Looking back, that was a great thing they did. Secondly, if you learn everything you know, if you think you know everything, or I'm sorry, if you think everything you know comes from Schoolhouse Rock, then we have to have a little bit of a conversation. But other than that, let's watch it. Do you want to see the Schoolhouse Rock with this? This is how I memorized. I can still go, they have one flaw, other than that, it's great. You see this? I know a lot of elementary schools, now you get into these. It's a this is great. Ready? Fire! Okay. I like that. That's fun. Speaking of that, let's get to rat battles. So, the rat battle. So, when you construct your ring for fighting rats, make it steel about this high. And then you gotta get really big boots. And what's the other thing you have to do? I told some people. Yeah, you file your teeth down to points. Because it's how many rats you can get, and there's a time limit. So then they dump the hundreds of rats in, and you stomp, and you grab, and you bite. Do you want to win? Who's with me? I'll tell you what, they hadn't something like that. Yeah, and you would bet on how many rats they would kill. There's some guy from Philadelphia, he did like 150 in a minute. It was like 1845. That's actually true. Rat fighting was a big deal. I know. If only we could do that now. So the ratification, in the Constitution, it says, by the way, this is the fight between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And there's a lot of kind of crude humor in that. That was very, they're into crude humor in 1788. Very crude. Won't go into details of the crudeness, but if you look on the right side, you can see it. But, yeah, it's from 1788. And they said the Constitution only requires 9 states. Did you see it? Do you see what's crude? Moving on, if you don't understand it, good for you. Okay, so the Articles of Confederation required 13 states, but the Constitution said, hey, we only need 9. Because they knew it's going to be tough to get all 13. So they just made up a standard. So this wasn't, this is really literally, they're just winging it. They just said this, and enough people are like, okay. And so 9 states. And immediately they're going to divide up into 2 groups. The 2 groups in the ratification battle will be the first group are the Federalists. Why? For the federal government. The most famous of these would be Washington. And then, of course, Alexander Hamilton, who, when most of the New York delegation left the convention because they're going to rewrite the government, he would pop in and out. We need a king, we need a dictator, then leave. But he was very much involved with it. And then Adams, who was still in Britain, Madison, John Jay, there are a few others. George Mason was on the, we can't go through everybody. But these are the Federalists. And this is a federal, this is talking about the states ratifying. And the pillars, each pillar, Delaware was the first, and trying to get other states to ratify. By the way, you'll notice they're trying to get Massachusetts to be the next one, and they're hoping for divine help. See the hand in the cloud? So, what was their goal? They wanted a strong central government and a strong executive. We need that. We got the problem of Britain, Spain, the frontier, Shays' rebellion, control finance, a sound economic system, treaties, etc. Every once in a while, you hear people say today that they wanted a weak central government in the Constitution, and that is just insane. That would have shocked the Federalists. By the way, if anybody says the Constitution was written to be a weak central government, what they're really saying is they want the government to have less powers in certain areas now. And they're acting like that's what they wanted then. Because they're hoping most people will not know what was actually in the Constitution. That's what they're hoping. And it might be a sound bet. Next, they want to regulate commerce and foreign affairs. They needed this regulation. We need this. Interstate commerce, international trade, etc. Next, they need the power to tax. Without the power to tax, you can't have money. It just doesn't happen. Governments have to tax in the currency they want, or money has no value. That's why when people talk about Bitcoin or those kind of things, cryptocurrency, they don't have any idea how money functions. That's only a way for organized crime or fraud, because they immediately value them in dollars, immediately. So it's just a way to try to get fraud. Next, this gives us a unified state, and instead of 13 bickering states in a confederation, it's one country, and therefore we can speak as a voice and maybe get some international respect. And let's say the Great Lakes. And that government of a better sort. There's too much democracy. And then the anti-federalists. I have some really good news for all of you. One of the first political parties are going to be the Federalists and the Republicans. That's coming up in a couple of years after this. The Federalists as a political party are not exactly the same as the Federalists for the Constitution. So I'm sorry there's going to be two Federalists. So you have to know the context. Federalists are in the ratification battle, Federalists are for the Constitution. In the first political parties, the Federalists are more merchant class. So, men like Patrick Henry. And Patrick Henry's talk of liberty, his big issue was, we also got to protect slaves. Sam Adams was opposed to his cousin. And George Mason bounced all over the place. At first he was all for it, and then he realized that the federal government's going to have a lot of power. Thomas Jefferson, in perfect Jeffersonian style, straddled the fence. Jefferson was hard to commit to anything. He was one of those, I believe this, but on the other hand, that's what he was. He was an intellectual. Intellectual doesn't make you smart, but it makes you very thoughtful. And thoughtful people can be indecisive. I can be rather thoughtful, so sometimes I can be indecisive. But don't test me. So, they feared the strong central government and the strong executive. They wanted more power for the states. A lot of them were state government officials. If you're a governor in like a big state like Virginia, this federal government will take away your power. So they didn't want that. Next, they feared that rule by a few elite. Men like Patrick, or the big reason George Mason was worried, he thought an elite merchant class in the big cities would dominate everything and destroy farmers, including big farmers like him. So they wanted, I put democracy, don't think real democracy, more democracy. More voice of the people. Next, the bell rang. Remember where we quit? I'll finish it on Monday. Sound good? First piece. All right, so have a good weekend. Rock when you find work. And keep punching waterfalls, right? Just keep punching waterfalls. What do we have on Monday? That was real enthusiasm for a quiz. See you tomorrow. Monday.
I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be here.
Let me write it down.
Thank you.
Trust me, I did not mean to.
You're all good.
Yeah.
So I'm getting on.
Why?
No.
Have a good day.
Oh, cool.
But so would it be okay to make this up before? I think you probably could. Say Friday.
Yeah.
I know.
I tried that out of my head. Let's see where we're at. I can make that up before.
Okay.
Because one of the questions will be on the ratification battle, and the other one will be on, oh, not the I haven't decided if I want, one way of the compromise is one will either be on the ratification battle or the event that led up to the Constitution.
Okay,
So you have enough to write one of the two choices.
right, yeah,
So let's talk, I can let you.
okay, thank you.
Go ahead, ring at me.
I didn't take my photos. I paid for them, but I got my photos, but I don't have my ID, so.
Oh, that reminds me, I gotta steal Mr. Peterson's photos.
You also got to hand back the test.
I'm gonna get, we just walk out into the mud of this basically.
Oh.
We're gonna make a model for Mr. Peterson's day.
A bowl would be good. I bowl, yeah. No, this is art.
You should probably hand back the test.
Your test. I got a lot of stuff that I don't have a great week. A lot of stuff. You should not have that bowl. Yeah.
Battle.
Right. I'm hearing things again. I'm losing my mind. That's a beautiful picture. That's amazing.
Thank you.
I feel like I was there.
Not bad.
That's the incredibly fast version of our government. It's all yours. Let's go. Oh, really?
It'll be a while.
Yeah, and the bottom's burnt.
You made on film today. Good job.
Yeah.
This is cold.
All right, let's learn.
Yeah,
We're gonna shut the camera off.
Are you going still? Yes.
All right, so we are
Like Back to the Future.
not in the rap battle.